So here we are at the place where the stone for making the Croton Dam was quarried. It's up in that big cliff face there that was all quarried out of there from a solid piece of bedrock and cut into blocks for making the dam. And the leftovers, the broken pieces, are piled up here, and we can get a good view of it if we just walk in along this path. A little over 100 years ago when this was made, and they just dumped these broken rocks right here. So sometimes I come with my boat from that direction, and you can just paddle or row in the spaces amongst these rocks. It's quite scenic. Have a look yourself. Yeah, you can see some of the squared off edges of the rocks that they were trying to cut. From age 2, I grew up in Croton-on-Hudson until I was ready to go to college, at age 17. I like to see things, how they change with time, and I certainly like this place, the dam and the reservoir, and maybe we'll get a chance to look at the dam. It's under repairs now, so I grew up in a house in the woods. It was surrounded by this forest, which is not a virgin forest, it's a second growth forest. And at the time I was growing up, it was only about 40 years old, because the place had all been farmed. I don't think we have a lot of time for that.
Okay.
And it's a little rough to get there. So I was thinking of not talking a lot, or maybe at all right away, about quantum things. It's tough to swallow in one mouthful. But talk more about memory and loss of information, and where it goes. If you are the things that happened in the past, how real are they? This old woods road was once a more serious road. See, this is an electrical insulator. Somebody had electricity coming through here. Or maybe it was an electric fence. But I think those are rather new. I don't think they had very many electric fences is 60 years ago, and really more than that. Ever since the 1930s, I don't think this was used as a farm. It's pretty poor farmland. full of these stones. And if you look at those stone walls, they have many more stones in them than they need to be a good dividing line, because they had to keep building them until all the stones were out of the field. We're getting pretty close to where the bear was, the bear family. This is a very quiet place to come in the winter after a snowstorm. You see no tracks at first, and then a few animal tracks and a few people tracks. So this is the sort of thing I would like to photograph. I think I'll try to take one straight down. That will be interesting because of the effect of the flash. I will try not to drop it. Now I keep these under my coat for a while, right? Yes, the photography has a long history of course, when it was first invented, people were amazed at how perfectly accurate it was. They would take a photograph of a brick wall and count the bricks and make sure they agreed with the bricks in the original, which of course they did. But we were talking earlier about the controversy about photography as a recorder or an interpreter of nature, and the mere fact that the photographer chooses when to take the picture and in what direction to aim the camera is already a big distortion of what you would see if you were actually there. So I've been interested for a long time in this question of from a physics point of view, what record of the past exists in the present? If you have some information that was not considered important at the time, and nobody bothered to save it, is it still there? In what sense is it still there? And nowadays, of course, much more of it is saved, but it's probably not all saved. And I made some calculations that to the effect, really, they're not very serious calculations, but back of the envelope calculations, that all sorts of things that happen on this earth, which are at the time incontrovertible, like you look down there, and at each second or two, there is a particular place where a raindrop falls. And anybody who's looking at it will say, yeah, the raindrop fell right there. There's a bubble over there by that rock, and in a little while it'll probably break. And you're making a movie of it, so that bubble is likely to be preserved for some time. But what about the other bubbles up and downstream that nobody's looking at right now? How real is their existence or their presence or the fact that they were at a particular place at a particular time? So that's something that I've been wondering about for a number of years. And the conclusion of it is that the information is all still in the universe in some sense, but it's not on the earth anymore for many of these things. Oh, this is a good one. I'll do this with a long exposure. I think what happens to that information is that it gets spread out, not just among the molecules that formed that bubble, but amongst the other water molecules that are in the stream, especially after the bubble breaks. The bubble is not there anymore, but the little waves that it makes when it broke are still there, but those waves spread out and influence a lot of other molecules of water. And then light comes down from the sky and reflects off the water, and in a sense is making extra copies of that information, because every person who is looking at some of that light can see where the bubble was or where the waves are. But some of that light escapes up through the trees and scatters off the clouds and then goes off into space at the speed of light. And we know you can't travel faster than the speed of light. So if enough of this information escapes from the Earth, it means that what we have left on the Earth is plenty, but not enough to say where exactly that particular bubble was and when it formed and where it floated to and when it disappeared. So I think there's a lot of information about the physical past of the world, which is transient in this way, essentially because it gets mixed up with other information, and then some of it escapes. Enough of it escapes that we can't reconstruct it. Interesting. Oh, the problem is there's a droplet of water in the viewfinder. That's what's happening to me. Okay, so where were we? Aside from getting our cameras wet. I would like to tell you today about the Institute of Holistic Computer Wellness. Computers are such complicated devices nowadays that they have some of the same health problems as people. And unfortunately, the computer establishment has been giving us harsh remedies that often do more harm than good. And we propose with our institute to return the treatment of computer ailments to entirely natural methods. For example, we have a computer homeopathy in which if you want to protect your computer from a virus, you don't install a harsh antivirus program that may do a lot of damage, but instead you take the virus, you take the bit string of the virus, and you randomize the order of the bits, and you throw half of them away, and then you put some random bits made by coin tossing, and you keep doing that a number of times, and then you just take one bit of the result and put it into a place in the computer's memory where it is not executed. Similarly, we have the fact that our computers use commercial electricity, and much of that comes from polluting plants or from nuclear plants, places that you wouldn't want to go yourself. And to make up for that, of course, it's hard to wean your computer totally from commercial electricity, but we have some lemon battery in which you can supplement your computer's diet with some natural electricity. Shall we look at this last picture I took? Yeah, see if we got anything, because it's had time to develop by now. Yeah, here's a picture of the forest, and it's full of details of the trees, like where those branches are now, which will be different next year. And maybe this is the only permanent record of them. This photograph that we just took. Okay, we'll go back. There's some other topics that are related to what I wanted to what I was telling you about before, and that is the real question of what evidence in the present is there about the past of what had gone on there before, and that's a subject I've been rather concerned about or interested in. You might say the most pessimistic idea to come out of the 19th century, of course there were many, in physics, is the idea of the what they call the heat death of the universe. That is where where the entropy increases to the maximum, everything is in the state of maximum disorder, and everything is at the same temperature, and there's no life is possible, no macroscopic motion, there's no flow of anything, just everything is still and dead and lukewarm. And this was predicted by the science of thermodynamics, which was discovered in the context of trying to improve the efficiency of steam engines. So something that started off extremely practical gave a very far-reaching scientific consequence, which even extended into the realm of philosophy, like what is the future of our universe bound to be. And of course, the parts of the universe that we're familiar with, like the human body and our everyday activities, manage to evade this heat death by continually taking in food and electricity and so on, and exporting entropy into the environment in the form of heat and waste products. But if you put anything, however ingenious, into a box and you keep anything from going in or out, even energy, it's going to die. So we'll go on from there once we get indoors and dry off a little bit. Why don't we just surround the Earth with mirrors on all sides, put it in a mirror box, so that all this information about stuff we don't care about doesn't escape, it just comes back. Well, this, of course, having all this thermal radiation coming back at the Earth, it's about the same amount of watts as the sunlight coming in. Your Earth would have a pretty serious climate change problem. Of course, you could get rid of that imbalance by blocking out the sun and just putting making the mirror box completely surround the Earth so that no sunlight gets in, and the Earth just stews in its own juices. You notice the rain is just slowing down just as we're going indoors. Well, the other interesting, or the other almost complementary feature of 19th century thought about this was that if you had a place like the Earth that was instead subjected to the conditions that the Earth has, where energy comes in from the sun in an orderly form, and then there's an avenue for the same amount of energy to escape in a disorderly form, that the Earth's production of entropy and increase of disorder is held in check, and as a side effect of this production of entropy and the removal of it, the production of disorder and the removal into the environment, things get more and more complicated on the Earth, and indeed the standard hypothesis that most people believe, starting with Darwin and Spencer, who was more of a philosopher of the 19th century, is that this is what caused the origin of life from inanimate matter over geological time. And now with more thorough geology, we know this actually happened pretty quickly in about the first few 100 million years after the Earth got cold enough for it to happen.
What will happen to those logs in terms of information once they are burned?
That's a good question. They might have left certain real imprints on the log pile that are not going to be disturbed by the burning. Of course, you're taking pictures of them now. That's going to freeze them pretty well. A very good question. Some of these stones have been here for ever since my wife was a baby. I think some details of them will be lost and some will be kept. I guess that's the conservative answer. Yes, you'd have to say that. So because the ashes do preserve some details of the skeleton of the wood, but not all. Certainly a lot of it will go into the smoke and the heat, which is not going to be preserved. The nails still be there, even though there was a lot of fire going on. And maybe some parts of the skeleton of the wood that survived the burning are like that. But many other parts, like where these cell walls that have been frozen into the wood as a microscopic detail ever since the tree was there, that will probably be lost in the smoke and it won't survive in the ashes, so it'll go into the smoke and the radiation into the house to keep it warm and up the chimney. And so that will be lost, and it'll go into space where we will never get it back. So if somebody wanted to know where a particular wood cell is, they'd better look now. So this is me when I was about 2 years old, and I guess I was always interested in science. At this point, I remember I was looking down into the engine room of a ferry boat, and it was a steam-powered engine, so it had these pistons with a moving, big brass shiny pistons moving in and out of the cylinders, making a lot of steam. And everybody in the engine room was very hot because of the steam, so they had the window open. And I just loved all those mechanical parts in motion. Now these are some pictures of my parents. This is when they were about nearly my age. Now in the 70s. They liked to ride the bicycles. This is when they were first getting married, or about before they were married. Lived in New York City. They built this house out in the woods in Westchester because they wanted to not have to pay rent every month. My father's income as a musician in the big bands was very irregular, and they built this little house. In fact, it was a little hazardous at one point. If a tree fell down on top of the house and smashed the roof partly in. They even managed to get a piano in there, and you can see the house was never finished. There were sort of gaps in the ceiling. Here's all my chemistry equipment here, and the piano. This is the house I lived in until I was 17 years old. This is, again, looking in the round mirror that they had. This is our dining area and kitchen. And here's the kitchen itself. It's very small, with some storage for spices and the bread box. And this is a hallway in the house. We have all of our telephone numbers written up here. This is back around 1960 when we left the house. Oh, I go back there from time to time. My father, who had built it largely by himself and with my mother, was very discouraged when it fell apart and got vandalized, and he never wanted to go back there and look at it. But I looked at it, and I thought of it as an interesting process of decay. Today I would like to talk to you about a new ethical movement called the Mineralarians. It's a hard word. You take the word mineral, as in mineral, and add Aryan, as in vegetarian. What the Mineralarians are is a group of people who have determined to subsist on foods of mineral origin. Now, this doesn't mean eating rocks, which you would die if you only ate minerals. What this means is that the foods that you need, all of the nutrients you need, like carbohydrates and fats and amino acids and vitamins and of course minerals, should be made without involving animals or plants. So it's like vegetarianism, except it recognizes what we now know from molecular biology, that we're almost as closely related to the wheat and to the yeast in a loaf of bread as we are to our fellow animals. And so if we really want to be ethical, we have to avoid killing any of those organisms. And the way we do it is to eat chemicals that are made from rocks and air and water, petroleum. And if you think that there isn't cruelty involved in eating a loaf of bread, observe that all life forms, from the lowliest bacterium to the tallest redwood tree, have an instinct to avoid unfavorable situations, so very favorable environments, and to seek out the favorable ones. And this is exactly what Thomas Jefferson called the pursuit of happiness. Now, there are some strict mineralarians, and they say, wait a minute, if we eat something that's made from coal or petroleum, it's like eating a roadkill. This animal or this plant was killed millions of years ago, and it wasn't our fault, but it's still something we don't want to put into our mouth. For those people, if there's enough interest, we will make strict mineralarian food that's made from meteorites. But that's a research project at the moment. Thank you for your interest. So this is, you might say, if the heat death prediction of a closed system was the godless equivalent of hell, then the origin of complicated structures in life under open non-equilibrium conditions was a kind of the godless creation. I believe Darwin had a lot of trouble with his relatives because he was an atheist and he thought all of this could happen without any divine intervention. In order to treat those ideas more scientifically, we need something that isn't so subjective and anthropocentric way of defining complexity. What is it that is more complex in a mathematical sense or in a structural sense about something that's alive, or even some of the complex products of living things like the books or the shells of mollusks, or all of the things that are the side effects of life. An approach that I have advocated for this is what I call logical depth. So this is the road we used to walk along. We would catch the school bus down there, and we would walk every day up from school along this road, which was navigable by cars. That tree hadn't fallen across it, and so on. My parents would come in and out along this road in their Jeep. A structure is, I would call, logically deep if it contains internal evidence of having had a complicated history. So this gets back to the question of history. What happened in the past? If a structure has evidence within itself of having had a complicated history leading up to it, then we say that it's logically deep, and as a structure of interest and non-triviality, and you might even say it's a structure that you ought to try to preserve it rather than let it be destroyed. At this point, my sister and I would be out of sight of the road. We'd be pretty much in the dark wilderness, and we were a little afraid of the dark. But our father thought of that, and along the line here, just right around that corner, he put a small light bulb that was always on. It was 7.5 watts. And we could see that light at this point, and we would have the encouragement to go on around this corner and see the light right over there. And then once we got to that point, just a little farther, we could see the lights of our house. So it was very comforting. Right here, that's where that light was. The wire would come up there, and it was attached to this tree, and there was that little light. And then we would go on this way. Occam's razor is the principle in science that for every phenomenon or body of observational data, you should seek the explanation that is the most economical in its hypothesis. One of my former colleagues at IBM, Gregory Chaitin, suggested that this process be computerized to make it more objective. This is the approach that's called algorithmic information theory, and it was developed simultaneously by a number of people in different parts of the world. Probably most famous, Kolmogorov in the Soviet Union. Anyway, the idea is we measure the likelihood of a hypothesis by digitizing it, and the most plausible hypothesis is the one with the smallest number of bits. But when we say it's a hypothesis to explain something, we mean that if we feed it into a standard computer, a standard universal computer, it'll cause the computer to perform a computation that produces the object that we're trying to explain as the output. So when instead of saying the simplest hypothesis to explain a phenomenon, let's say the simplest hypothesis to explain the motion of the planets in the solar system, we say, what is the input with the smallest number of bits that will cause a calculation to occur that will describe the motions of the planets in the solar system to a certain degree of precision. So the whole thing has been digitized and reduced to the input-output behavior of a computer. Well, this approach of algorithmic information theory is generally quite productive, and it is really an objective form of Occam's razor, but of course it has handicaps that it's not computable in practical terms. But from a philosophical point of view, it makes the definition non-anthropocentric. My father was a pretty serious amateur astronomer, so he had a telescope that he put on that tall hilltop over there. I remember looking through it a few times, but the amount of growth of trees around any place that you cleared off in this part of the countryside, the trees grew up so rapidly that it was really pretty poor conditions for using a telescope. There's almost no open sky visible from here, and it wasn't feasible to cut down all the trees. So it didn't work very well as a telescope place, and eventually my father used the telescope in another place where there was a field around it. But now, how do I distinguish a valuable object from just a not very interesting object? Two examples of not very interesting objects would be a perfect crystal in which the atoms are all in orderly arrangement, or which is a minimally random object, or a gas in which the atoms are all uniformly scattered around in space and with no order. And the digitized representations of those are almost opposite. One of them is concisely describable by saying where the atoms are, and then they are every so often, just a certain distance away. The other one is each atom you have to say where it is independently. It takes a lot of bits to describe. But the thing about it that we would like to capture and distinguish is that neither of them is an interesting structure. Neither contains evidence inside itself of having had a complicated history. Now consider something else, which would be an arrangement of atoms that's similar to what you might find in a human body. It's intermediate in orderliness between a crystal and a gas, but it contains evidence of the whole process of organic evolution. Or to take a purely mathematical example, suppose we were listening to a radio signal from space and we heard it's very easy to hear radio signals that are just very orderly, or ones that seem to be completely chaotic. But if we heard a radio signal that repeated the digits of pi, then we would say, oh, there must be something out there that is calculating this number. So going back now to the definition of what I mean of an interesting kind of complexity, it's a structure where if we look for the simplest explanation, the path to get from that explanation to the thing it explains is non-trivial. It has many logical steps. So the logical depth of a structure is not the size of its most concise description, but how much computing it takes to generate it from that description. That's what I have proposed for measuring the degree of non-triviality or value, I might just say value, of a mathematical object, an object that is digital or can be digitized. We digitize everything now. We digitize pictures, we digitize audio, we digitize sculptures, maybe we'll eventually digitize flavors. This tree is new, falling down. So the cars would be parked right around here. And there is the ruins of the house that I grew up in. We would park the car, walk along here, and this is the path that we took to get into our house. This is a nice rock for sitting on. We always would sometimes go over there and sit on that black rock. Now here the path branched, and the way to go into the entrance was down here. This is our front doorstep. And we'd go into a little anteroom here. And but this path went up in the less used way. We would go up to past the kitchen window, and there would be a place of a patio that was paved with these pieces of slate stone. And the other thing that was a little unusual and rural is that we didn't have, especially when we had to pump the water from the pump, we didn't have a big supply of water. So in the summer, whenever it started raining, my father would give my sister and me a bar of soap and said, go out and take a shower in the rain. And we would come out here. It was very cold. It wasn't warm water like you'd want. Down there is the washing machine. Somebody rolled it down there. This is our stove for keeping the house warm. It was a kerosene stove. And this, where I'm standing here, was our living room. That's the corner of it over there. And over there is the kitchen. Back here, essentially right here, was where we would have breakfast and dinner. The eating area, table set into a little alcove in the wall. Most people will say ethics has entirely to do with humans, maybe humans and animals, but not just pure mathematics. But the ideas of pure mathematics, which are the ones that develop these ideas of the the size of a computer program and how long it runs on the computer. These are totally mathematical ideas. Well, maybe we can get an ethics out of that by saying that which should be preserved is that which is logically deep. Now, that nicely comports with the feeling that people have that something that's existed for a long time, such as the genome of a species, is especially bad for the last individual to become extinct, or for the last copy of a good book to be destroyed. It doesn't matter if you have a book that has many copies and you destroy most of them, but the last one is especially bad to destroy it. And this is not connected only with living things, although we would say that the deepest things on the earth are probably the living things and the products of living things, such as the products of civilization.
What would be the logical depth of the place?
Oh, well, mostly it's the logical depth of life and civilization on Earth. The amount that my parents and my sister and I added to it is negligible. If you took even something as simple as this, you would probably be able to figure out a lot about civilization from that. Who could make such a thing? Why would they make it? An archaeologist could be very interested in that. Of course, the archaeologists know where it came from. But I think in terms of that I was discussing of the physical evidence, almost any bit of stuff from around here, not this leaf, for example, but almost anything else would have a tremendous amount of effort, of evidence for not only life, but human civilization. I sometimes get some objections to say, well, if you're saying that many copies of a good book are no more valuable than one copy, are you not saying that many people is no more valuable than one person? And I thought about that, worried about it. I don't want that answer, because that gets in the direction of well, you don't want to go there in terms of ethics. And I think the answer was actually suggested by my son when he was a teenager, and he said he had fallen in love for the first time, and he said to me, "I think I must be feeling something that nobody else felt before." And I said, "Well, that's actually not true. I know it feels that way, but." What he reminded me of is that in fact most people, except for feelings like that, most things that people feel overlap very little from one person to another. If you think of all of your friends, they will amuse and complicate your life in ways that don't overlap very much. So you could say that people are so different that the structure present in two people is not the same as two copies of the same book. Now we would say, well, what about two bacteria? Of course, we don't usually, most of us feel very bad about killing bacteria. Sometimes we do it on purpose. But perhaps two bacteria are not very different from one. But somewhere along the line before you get to people, and maybe when you get to dogs or something like that, two is really pretty different from one, and almost maybe twice as good as one. So this gives you, at least it keeps this ethics from being totally evil. And having thought about this for a while, I came across a saying in the Talmud that whoever preserves a single life, it's as if he preserved an entire universe, and whoever destroys a single life, it's as if he had destroyed an entire universe, which is essentially the same idea. I don't think I've succeeded in convincing very many people that this is the right foundation of ethics, but taking the physicist's prerogative to think about every sort of subject that isn't physics, but trying to use the physics and mathematics as a hammer and regard everything else as a nail, that's about the farthest I've gone in that direction. My father had always been a musician, and when he and his brother and sister, who were also musicians, settled in the New York City area, and he had found this house, built this house. This was built, nowadays when someone says they're going to build a house, it means they hire someone to build it. In this case, they would bring in this cement blocks like that, and the wood, and build it stick by stick with some consulting architecture books. The other interesting thing was, without a telephone, my father had to figure out a way of communicating with my mother. So in those days we had battery-operated radios that used vacuum tubes. And he was playing in bands that would perform for WOR, radio station in New York. And he devised a code where in the course of the evening music program, he would have the choice of playing he played the bass fiddle, that's the bass viol, of playing a 2-beat bass or 4-beat bass. So it would go boom, 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 or boom, 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 boom. And the code was that he would set up a message beforehand, whether he was going to stay overnight and come back the next morning, if he was going to visit his sister who lived in the city. And one time my grandmother was visiting, and my mother was listening to the radio, and she said, "Oh, boy, that's his name. He's not going to come home tonight because he's staying with his sister." And my grandmother was mystified as to how she knew that, because she listened to the music. And then, of course, my father said, "Well, we could have been sending messages to German submarines, but not at a very high bit rate." So that was one of the fun things that he did. My sister had her interest over here, which had to do with horses, and she never had a horse, but she was interested in them. And I had all my chemicals over here. So I always wanted to be a scientist. Maybe was a little bit socially excluded, but it seemed kind of strange when I was in elementary school. And then but it was a great advantage to be able to just roam around and walk around in the woods and not be afraid of it. And that's where I grew up. Yes, I think this is a washing machine. I don't really remember. It may have been before my parents got the electric one. Off, on. Oh, it's more complicated than that. It's got that gear mechanism in there. I wonder what that is. Off, on, and what's this? On, off. So there are 2 ons and 1 off on this side. I don't know what that is. Do I want to change from my silly hat to my serious hat? Today I would like to give you an advertisement for Minuteman Pizza. Now, during the Cold War, billions and billions of dollars went into intercontinental ballistic missiles. These terrible weapons were built in enormous numbers and never used. A terrible waste. And now we have put those same technology to a more wholesome use. That is, we use these rockets to deliver fresh, hot pizza anywhere in the world in about half an hour. They seem a little bit expensive. It costs $795 for a plain pizza, but only $2 for each additional topping. So you suggest your toppings, and when you're ready, you need 2 people to order the pizza. They both turn the red key to the right simultaneously, and that initiates the launch sequence. The fresh ingredients are packed into the pizza delivery vehicle, and for economies of scale, we need the pizzas to be delivered many pizzas per rocket. But the technology for doing that was already developed in the Cold War. It's called MIRV, which stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicles. And these were going to be atomic bombs that would land on multiple targets. Instead, we have multiple pizzas, and we call them MIRV, M-E-R-V, Multiple Edible Reentry Vehicles. If you have a function like a wedding, you can order a whole bunch of these pizzas, and they will all be delivered within about 100 feet of the destination. You should just stay under the tent until all the pizzas have arrived. Remember, that's Minuteman Pizza. You can find it on the internet. Oh yes, future. So this was a farmer's field, and this was a stone wall marking a boundary, even though this is too rocky to be much of a field. Oh yes, future. Well, let's start it talking from the classical viewpoint of which was very, very eloquently put by Laplace, that if you knew the current state of every element of which the universe was composed and the laws by which it moved, you would know the future and the past perfectly. And nothing that had happened or would happen would be concealed from your awareness. So then the advent of quantum mechanics changed that. So the ordinary view of which I think most people would say, well, now because of quantum mechanics, there are things that are absolutely uncertain before they happen. So the which radioactive atom will decay first is supposed to be a pure chance. That was something that Einstein didn't like. On the other hand, the past is more, most people would think, well, if it happened, it did happen. And if it didn't happen, it didn't happen, so it's very definite. So the future and past would appear to be very different. Now, I've argued before, when I'm talking about this escaped information, that the past sometimes becomes ambiguous because whatever record there is has escaped beyond our reach. And in the quantum view, the future and the past are ambiguous in somewhat similar ways, although the past is more ambiguous. And I guess that's a more satisfying, the future is more ambiguous. That's a more satisfying way of looking at things. And yet it seems to say, how this is again what Einstein thought. This physics must be incomplete if it can't explain what is going to happen. And I guess that's an idea you have to get used to. But one of the ways of getting used to it is by saying that in the future there is a collection of many different things that might happen. And the full future consists of all of them together with no distinction as to which happened and which didn't happen. However, in the past, in this example we had of a raindrop landing somewhere, for a while, everyone agrees that one of them happened and the other didn't. And yet, when that information escapes, as it often does, we are again restored to what I call a more Olympian perspective. That is, that the full description of reality is that there are two things and they are on an equal ontological status. That is, there is no reason to say one of them is more what happened than the other. Meanwhile, a whole bunch of waves on the water behind you that you were not photographing have escaped any permanent record, and I'm saying that the waves that happened are no more real than the waves that might have happened in my way of looking at it. Of course, out there, the ones that did happen and you recorded are the real ones, as long as your movie lives and it doesn't get burned up and escape into space. I guess that's I've already delved too far into philosophy. Maybe I ought to study a little bit more before I start talking about it. Oh, one of my earliest memories was when I was about 3. I took a car trip with my grandmother, and it was very hot, and we stopped to get something to drink, and we saw in the front of a drugstore these drinking birds. I'd never seen them, and they would bob back and forth like this, and then dip their beaks into some water. And I was very fascinated. My grandmother couldn't explain to me how it worked. And then, of course, I grew up to be interested in physics and especially thermodynamics, which explains how it works. It works from the head being cooler than the belly, and that causes the vapor pressure to be less in the head, and the liquid rises up the neck until it topples forward, and then that causes the beak to get wet. So as long as the relative humidity is less than 100%, in principle it has a source of free energy to drive it. And here it goes. They had been invented, I think, just a little bit before I was born. So I always have a drinking bird.